Hi, I'm Stephen E. Andrews, author of 100 must-read science fiction novels, a couple of other books, various essays, short stories. Welcome to Outlaw Bookseller, my channel. Today I'd like to start talking about one of my favourite authors, probably my favourite living author, who just happens to be a friend of mine as well. We connected a long time ago and hit it off, and it's been a great pleasure to be in touch with him over the years. And in my opinion, he is not only my favourite author, living, he's also the greatest living science fiction writer in the world, in my opinion. He's also the key writer, I believe, in the New Wave movement, who really made an effort, I would say more than anybody with the possible exception of J.G. Ballard, to help SF rejoin the mainstream of literature for which it belonged before the invention of the term science fiction in 1926. And a wonderful, wonderful slipstream novelist whose ability to deconstruct boundaries between genres is almost unprecedented. I'm talking about Christopher Priest. This is his novel The Prestige, which is his best known novel through virtue of being made into a very successful film by Christopher Nolan, also entitled The Prestige. So I'm going to talk to you about The Prestige and the secret history of why there has been no sequel to the film or the book. The story begins, for me, way back in 1987, when I first met Christopher Priest at the Worldcon in Brighton, which was then the biggest and longest, and I think the best attended Worldcon in history. That's a science fiction world convention, of course, for those of you not familiar with the terminology. And I don't think there's been much has been as long. It was 7 days, 24 hours a day, at least 3 streams of activity running all that time. And I think it was the best attended, and it was a wonderful experience, and one that I'm unlikely to ever see happen again in my lifetime in terms of it being as good and as groundbreaking as important. It was a really exciting time in SF then. Cyberpunk had come along, the new wave was crumbling a little bit, possibly with the key writers all having moved into the mainstream, and it was really exciting times. So how do we go from 1987 to The Prestige? Well, at the Worldcon, I attended a signing by Christopher Priest. We hit it off. We were at the same party in one of the hotels that night, and he asked for my phone number, and when a few weeks later, after the Worldcon finished, he rang me up at home. I was living in Bath then, as I do now, and he was living in Pewsey in Wiltshire. Pewsey is thinly disguised in the setting of his novel The Quiet Woman, which he was writing at that point, which had a working title of Explanations, a wonderful title which he never went back to, but that's what he told me one day in Pewsey about that. Chris and I got on really well, and we stayed in touch over the years. And in 1995, his novel The Prestige appeared, and he had written to me before that, saying, about a year before, saying that he got fed up with trying to sort of make a big commercial success in the literary mainstream, and instead decided to write a good old-fashioned SF novel. Now, when a writer like Chris says a good old-fashioned SF novel, you know there's going to be something out the ordinary, because he was always a boundary breaker. He's the guy who actually introduced the term New Wave from avant-garde cinema into literary science fiction. At least that's been attributed to him. He doesn't talk about it very much, but I'm sure that's the case. And obviously there are certain similarities between New Wave SF and its experimentalism and New Wave cinema. So this was the result that came out after that letter, the good old science fiction novel and The Prestige. I'm not going to tell you too much about it because you might want to read it or watch the film. The film's great, really, really good. This is a 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, which I haven't actually watched yet because I can't do 4K, but it's got a regular Blu-ray on there. And The Prestige won the James Tate Black Memorial Award, which was an award for general fiction. It's the oldest literary award in the country, and the chap who was looking after the award then, he thought Chris had stopped writing, and he came across The Prestige and he thought, I'm going to give the award to Christopher Priest because he's such a good writer and he's really neglected. And so that was great for Chris. And a few years passed and the book came out. I was running a bookshop in Swansea at the time, a very big city bookshop, and that winter when the Prestige was first published, I remember ordering 20 copies of the book in hardcover and selling them without any difficulty at all. Now 20 doesn't sound like a lot, but for a cult novelist in a provincial city, that's quite significant. It's before the internet, and it just showed that Chris did have a following, and that had his books been stocked more widely in hardcover around the UK, in all sorts of places, he would have sold a lot more books. Of course, once the internet came along, that took up the slack from many booksellers who weren't stocking his books extensively, and obviously his sales have been more regular since, and that's helped a lot of writers. So I had this letter from Chris back in 99. We were corresponding by letter then, hardly anybody was using email. I didn't have a PC to do that. And he talks this letter about various things. A lot of it's personal, so I'm not going to give you exact details. But something that he revealed in this letter to me was that he was unhappy with the way that his then publisher, Simon & Schuster, were handling things. And he said that he had been floundering because he'd gone to them via his agent with an idea, which was to do a sequel to The Prestige. And what actually happened was that his agent and his publishers were very tight-lipped about this, and he felt that they weren't interested, and he talked to them about this, and both agent and publisher apparently said that The Prestige had been a critical success, but not a commercial one. So this was rather sort of disheartening because he had a strong idea, and Chris had never written a sequel before. And because of the framing narrative of The Prestige and the fact it's different to the film, if you've read the book, you'll know that. If you haven't read the book but have seen the film, do, because you'll be interested in the differences. He felt there was a lot more in the story, and I personally agree. I think a sequel by Priest would be a fascinating idea in itself. So they really didn't have any sort of idea what to do then. And that sort of left him in the lurch in about 2000. And he soon split with Simon & Schuster, who published his next novel, The Separation, as a trade paperback original. The first time one of his books hadn't been, a hardcover original, which was shocking for a novelist of his distinction. So he then signed to Gollancz. Gollancz did the first hardcover, The Separation, and his career has sort of been very steady since then. So a few years later, Christopher Nolan, writer and director, who made films like the Batman trilogy with Christian Bale and Memento, which is a film that Christopher Priest had enjoyed because of its sort of focus on memory and the sort of unreliability of reality and narrators, and things like Tenet and Inception. Christopher Priest's material, of course, is a natural for a director and writer like that, and Christopher Nolan's brother, of course, is obviously involved in the writing as well. And they loved The Prestige and wanted to adapt it. So this was a lifeline for a writer like Chris, who'd been working solidly since the late 60s. It's only modest commercial, but great critical success. So it was great to see the film coming. It was very exciting. It's good to see it was a big budget and big stars. And I thought, well, this is great for Chris. He will finally sort of make some money and be able to have a more comfortable life after years and years of toil. So I was invited along to a special friends and family showing at the Odeon in Leicester Square of The Prestige, which was really, really exciting. The guest list was incredible. There were actors like Ken Faree from Dawn of the Dead, Joanne Whalley-Kilmer. They didn't turn up, unfortunately, but I was more than happy because some of the cream of British SF writing and editing were there. So I got to meet people like Paul Macaulay, Alistair Reynolds, who, like me, is from South Wales, a really nice guy. Malcolm Edwards, I think, was there. And Liz Williams and her partner Trevor, really wonderful people. Robert Holdstock, it was great to meet Robert Holdstock again. I met him once before and talked with him on the phone. And of course he died sadly a few years later, which was a great, great tragedy. And his partner Sarah was absolutely lovely. So, and it was also great to see Lee Kennedy again, another old friend of mine from SF writer from the States from the 80s. I haven't seen her for a while. And I got to meet Chris's children as well, which was a real treat because they're twins, and a lot of his work since their birth has been about twins and doppelgangers and what have you. So it's quite interesting stuff. So at the showing, I can't think it was before, I think it was before, we went to the pub and we had a chat, and I said to Chris, what about the sequel to The Prestige? Are you going to write it now? And he said, I can't. And I thought, what does he mean? And I said, aren't you going to write it? And he said, I can't. And then the penny dropped, and I realised that what had probably happened was that the rights to the characters had been sold to the film company along with the rights to the book, which made perfect sense in case they wanted to do a sequel. So that must have been really frustrating for Chris, because had Simon & Schuster and his agent gone ahead and green-lighted The Prestige 2, as he was calling it as a working title, there would have been 2 books, and there could have been a whole series of films, and obviously it could have been a bigger phenomenon than it was. As it is now, The Prestige isn't always remembered by people when you mention it. People who have usually seen it, but it takes a prod to get them to recall it. There was a very similar film released at the same time called The Magician, a real knockoff, which was nowhere near as good, and it was obviously commissioned that time. And Chris's book actually came at the beginning of a little mini wave of books about Victorian conjurers. I mean, The Bullet Trick was one of them. There are a couple of others. I think Carter Beats the Devil is another one. I've not read these other books, but they had that sort of vaudeville magician Victorian background, which is quite interesting, because they probably did better than The Prestige. The Prestige had sort of got their year about 4 or 5 years before then. So there's an example of how, in this case, publishers and an agent failed to have the foresight. Of course, nobody can ever tell when something like this is going to happen, but that's the secret behind The Prestige. It was a great day to go and see the film and to see Chris again. I've seen him sporadically ever since, as he lives on the other side of the country. He remains my favourite writer. If you've not read The Prestige, it's a great book. It's very entertaining. It's different to the films. If you've seen the film, do read the book as well, because it's significantly different. Fundamentally because the framing narrative, an awful lot of the detail is totally dissimilar. And one more fact, I remember that years before, when I ran a bookshop for Pan, which was in Bath in 1986, the publisher's rep for Abacus and Sphere came to me, and they had just published The Glamour, which is my favourite contemporary or modern novel, in paperback. And that's by Christopher Priest. And if you've not read The Glamour, you must. It is one of those stunning novels I've ever had the pleasure to read. It's absolutely astonishing. I'm going to say no more about it here, because I will talk more about Chris extensively at a later date. And he said that when they had the sales conference, there were all sorts of things going on in the background, with sort of naked girls running through the room, people in gorilla suits, and there was a conjurer there misdirecting their attention. So that was like a sort of precursor of what would come. So obviously that idea probably came from Chris, and he was thinking about this, and he's very big on misdirection. There'll be a lot more Christopher Priest. This, of course, is a first edition. It's one of those things that's it's signed as well. More or less all my books by Chris are signed. The only one I haven't got signed is The Quiet Woman. I don't know why that didn't happen, because we were seeing each other, and it just became one of those casual things where I felt he'd signed everything. So I must get that remedied at some point. So hope you're okay up there in Scotland, Chris. That's the secret history of The Prestige and how the sequel never happened. This is Outlaw Bookseller, signing out for now.